it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code Biographers at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code Biographers at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin idyllic.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Exactly. But, and actually, I meant to go see it again, because after I saw it the first time, I was like, I thought that was so good. I want to see it again on the big screen.
Good. I want that Superman and the Pattinson Batman to exist in the same universe. I know that the aesthetics are opposites. I understand that, but I still want it because I just want a cohesive DC universe like I've wanted ever since I was a teenager.
But you know, the thing is, though, if you rewind and even look at like the Batman Superman cartoons from the 90s and stuff like that, they would run them concurrently, and it was like you'd see a Batman episode and it was dark shadows, almost had this kind of 1940s aesthetic that was noir, very exactly like that Art Deco kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, now here's an episode of Superman in Metropolis, and it was like a bright sunny day, everything was colorful, and
kind of the 70s,
right, it sort of coexisted. So I feel like there's anybody that could build that bridge between those two universes, it would be like James Gunn. I think he'd have that ability to be like, Superman is going to show up into Gotham and he's going to be constantly going, why is everything so dark? And then when Batman comes over to Metropolis, he's going to be going, why is everything so bright? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be
it reminds me of Invincible, how like there's a faux Batman in Invincible, and the reason why his world exists is because the town is in a bubble of darkness.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, if you're in Invincible, there's like a Batman universe where basically like Chicago, essentially, is covered in a not M. Night Shyamalan, or like oh my god, the
Stephen
horror
King,
writer Stephen King bubble of darkness, and like when you enter it, you have to the darkness follows you or something like that, and Invincible goes in there and he's like, geez, it's so depressing in here, and I feel like that would be kind of a fun, I don't know, some way to bring that in.
For sure. All right, well, you ready to get going here, buddy?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman with Akiva Miola.
Hey.
I said it really fast again. Akiva Miola.
Yeah, Akiva Miola.
I say it, Akiva Miola. And we're about to start up a brand new series here. I'll save I'm sure everybody knows what it is by clicking on the actual episode. But just before we do, a couple of things I wanted to go over. First and foremost, wanted to give a couple of quick little shout outs here.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. That beautiful, beautiful email that we got from one of our listeners was amazing.
Yeah. Well, actually, so two things. So first and foremost, I actually didn't even tell you this. New Patreon subscriber. Wanted to give a quick little shout out to Pat. I want to say your last name is Oland, but in your actual profile, it says Pat. Just Pat. So, Pat, want to say thank you. Really appreciate your support here.
Thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate it.
And then also wanted to give a quick shout out as well to Kira, I think it's Henriksen. I'm pretty sure is how we pronounce your last name. But yeah, Kira, we, she and I have actually responded back and forth a few times via email. She actually sent me over a history presentation she did a year or so ago for her college. It's like an alma mater sort of a thing.
Awesome.
Or alumni, that's what I'm thinking of, not alma mater, as like an alumni presentation or whatever. And it was all about the history of things like coin collecting and jewelry and antiques, which is what she does. She works with restoring jewelry and stuff like that.
Isn't the term a numismatist, right? Or is it?
I believe that is the coin.
Never heard of that word. That's so interesting.
And everything. But yeah, Kira, just really appreciate the kind words, the kind support. Apparently, we made Kira cry at the end of the Marilyn Monroe series. Her exact words.
You made me cry at the end of you made everybody cry at the end of the Marilyn Monroe series. My sister can still barely get through it. It's
a very emotional series. But her exact words were, "Fuck you for reading Candle in the Wind" at the end. Which I thought was pretty funny. But no, I mean, come on, you gotta bring it all back home, you know. So. Anyhow, yeah, just wanted to give a quick couple shout-outs to both of y'all. Really appreciate your support and for listening. And then, as always, if anybody else wants to support the show, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. And additionally, if anybody feels like giving us a kind review somewhere, we'd appreciate that as well. We've seen a recent uptick in that, too. So, again, just appreciate everybody's support and kind words and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Pat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get going into our brand new series here, which, by the way, Akiva, this is series 12.
Wow.
Pretty cool. I know.
That's crazy.
It feels like every time that I say the series number, I'm always just like, dang, really? We've gotten that far? Like
12 characters? Can't believe
12 characters. Technically 13 characters, but the Victoria series is a lost series, we kind of say at this point. But anyway, all good. All right. So let's get going here. Now, for our next series, we're headed to the heartland of America during the dawn of the Civil War and beyond, exploring one of the most beloved authors of all time, and undoubtedly one of the biggest influences on what we now understand to be American language, literature, and comedy. So much so that the highest award given to a comedian in modern times bears his name. Though our next subject would, later in life, be awarded an honorary doctorate degree in literature from Yale University and 2 respective doctorate degrees in law from both Oxford University and the University of Missouri, his formal education was extremely limited, and he was largely self-taught. His childhood and young adulthood would be riddled with traumas, tragedies, and tribulations not aided by the carnage of the American Civil War, but his dreams and ambitions would take him all over the world, raising him to the heights of what many consider to be the greatest author and orator of his day, and earning him the nickname of the American Shakespeare after writing such classics as The Gilded Age, The Prince and the Pauper, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Despite being raised in a time and environment that fully embraced the ideas of slavery and racism, he would grow to become one of its most outspoken and influential critics, saying famous quotes like, "There are many humorous things in the world, among them, the white man's notion that he is less savage than any other savages." Maybe more than anything else, our next subject would come to perfectly embody the idea that you are not bound to the ideologies you are raised to embrace, that life rarely places you where you think you should be, that bouncing around from career to career is okay, that your true path isn't often discovered until later on in life, and that you can use all of those experiences to help lead you to where you're meant to be. Though he would live many lives and be known by many names, like Rambler, W. Epaminondas Adrestus Blab, Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass, John Snook, Sir Louis de Conte, Sergeant Fathom, Uncle Remus, Ensign Stebbings, Peregrine, Gypsy Girl, or by his birth name, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, the world will forever know him as Mark Twain.
What? That added so much. Hang on. Mark Twain isn't named Mark Twain?
No, sir.
What? Okay, I'm so stoked. I'm so stoked.
And there is, I don't think it's until episode 2 or even 3 that we actually get to the bottom of where his name comes from, but it's cool. It's really cool. All right, now, like always, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the primary sources used for this series. First is a book called Mark Twain, A Life by Ron Powers, which is a fantastic biography and considered by many to be the best of the best. Next up is a book called Mark Twain, an illustrated biography by Jeffrey C. Ward, Dayton Duncan, and the legendary Ken Burns. The book was actually meant to be a companion to the Ken Burns documentary series on Mark Twain, which is phenomenal, like all of Ken Burns' work. And lastly, the man himself, Mark Twain. I read portions of many of his books, including many excerpts from a compilation of his personal writings that would later be compiled into his autobiography. So kind of what happened was, over the course of Mark Twain's life, he wrote so much different stuff, but it was never an official autobiography. But later on, I think it was after he passed away, it was compiled into 3 massive compendiums. Right, that it kind of became his autobiography.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, I also want to address up front the various names I will be using for Mark Twain throughout this series. Now, Ron Powers, the primary source for my series here, he put it best by borrowing the opening address in Huckleberry Finn by saying, quote, "Persons failing to understand why I refer to my subject as Sammy in his childhood will be prosecuted. Persons failing to understand why I call him Sam and Clemens in dealing with his personal life thereafter will be banished. Persons failing to understand why I use Mark Twain when speaking of him as an author will be shot." So with that, let's get into the life of Mark Twain. And I should also say up front, everybody, this episode might be a little bit long. I wanted to get a pretty good amount into this first one, and this series is also going to be long. So if you aren't into that, I don't know what to tell you. If you really, really just want a condensed look at Mark Twain's life, I will also say the Ken Burns documentary series, I think it's 2 parts long. Each is like 2 hours long. You can watch it, but I'll tell you, if you listen to this series and then go watch that documentary, you're going to go, dude, he missed so much. So much. He
I also think we don't
over.
have any listeners who are looking for a condensed version of anything. If you find that this one isn't interesting, I might also recommend, we just mentioned, have 12 different series, and there's almost a guarantee that you haven't listened to all of them. So
True.
If you, for some reason, aren't interested in learning about one of the most famous American writers in history, do that.
And that is one of the reasons that I'm spending a ton of time on this series, is I'm hoping to show everybody, all of our listeners, just how important he was, and just how, and especially to our American listeners. For me, this has personally given me such an illuminated view into the American experience in that funny little middle zone after the Revolution, just before the Civil War, and then after the Civil War too. He almost perfectly embodies this American experience and helps to create so many, I don't know, Americanisms. And his life is so storied. You're going to find out there's just so many different little nooks and crannies to what he did. So anyway, hoping y'all enjoy the long form here. Now, long before he would assume the pen name of Mark Twain, on November 30th, 1835, Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born in the tiny frontier town of Florida in Monroe County, Missouri. So just to be clear, the town is called Florida. He is not in the state of Florida. Okay, so it's
interesting.
In Missouri, right? Now, his father, John Marshall Clemens, was born in Virginia, descending from an English family, and eventually became a lawyer in Kentucky. It was in Kentucky that John Marshall Clemens met Jane Lambton, a native to Kentucky whose family was Scotch-Irish.
Oh, there we go.
Shout out to Jack Daniel. And if anybody is curious, we did a whole thing on the Scotch-Irish in the series on Jack Daniel, so you can learn a little bit more about that if you want to. Now, the two would marry on May 26th, 1823, then moved to Tennessee. John Marshall tried to take up farming, running a store, and even became a postmaster, but nothing seemed to work in his favor, and the couple were most often living in relative poverty. Through these times, the couple would have 5 children: Orion, Pamelia, Pleasant Hannibal, Margaret, and Benjamin, though Pleasant Hannibal would only live to 3 weeks old and was seldom spoken of, probably due to grief.
That is some interesting names, by the way.
I know. And
what pleasant? Wait, hang on. Say one more time. I'm
So the 5 before Mark Twain, or I should say Sam, is Orion, Pamelia, Pleasant Hannibal, Margaret, and Benjamin.
And then he got
Samuel. Yeah.
Pamelia, Pleasant Hannibal?
Yes.
Like Hannibal, but nice.
Pretty much. And I will also say, for anybody that's sitting there going, I think you mean Orion. No, his brother's name is pronounced Orion. And people who are going, I think it's Pamela. It is spelled Pamela. It is pronounced Pamelia. I know.
That is some southern shit right there.
It very much is. But anyways, I wanted to make sure that was clear, where, people's ears aren't ringing and going, dude, you are not saying these names right. I promise you I am.
Pamelia and
Orion, not Orion, which was my instinct. And then I had to look it up.
Those
would
be great sci-fi names.
That's true. Now, a combination of pre-existing medical conditions and the stresses of providing for an ever-growing family would cause John Marshall to develop severe chronic headaches that he began to treat with an assortment of pills and quote-unquote miracle cures, many of which, surprise, surprise, were about 50% alcohol. So he was sort of
Sorry, kids, Daddy's got to go take his pill.
Grandpa's old cough medicine. So he was kind of like an accidental alcoholic. Like, he didn't really mean to be.
Honestly, that's like best case scenario considering our medical history so far in the biographers.
That is true.
Could have been lead.
It's true. Or like, heroin or something like that, laudanum.
Newly discovered uranium mine.
For real. Now, eventually in 1835, the year of Samuel Clemens' birth, the couple would settle in Missouri. When little Sammy, as his family called him, was born, he came 2 months premature, and most believed he would not survive childhood. Child mortality was relatively common around this time, and his own mother, Jane, would later recall, quote, "When I first saw him, I could see no promise in him." So she was like,
wow.
Even she thought he was going to die. Now, when a family friend came to see the tiny newborn, they would say, quote, "You don't expect to raise that babe, do you?" To which Jane meekly replied, quote, "I'll try." It's like, so she was sweet, A bit of a racist. We'll talk about that later, but she was a sweet lady.
I'll try. Is that a black person out there? Like,
well,
anyway,
kind
back to
of.
knitting.
Like, well, we're going to explore that a lot. Don't worry. Now, as a child, Samuel Clemens would spend his first 4 years of life mostly confined to a bed, sickly and underweight. Despite this, however, Sammy was a good-natured child, always possessing a bit of a wild spirit emphasized physically by the thick mop of curly, red hair that sat atop his head. He was a redhead.
Oh, he's a redhead.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, perhaps due to his premature birth, he was always known to be an observer, especially when it came to sounds, a trait that would later become a signature of his writing style. And despite his frail nature, he was known to be an avid sleepwalker, which caused his mother to believe he possessed what she called second sight.
Oh,
so
I also was an avid sleepwalker. Did I ever tell you this story about?
No.
So, I was a terrible sleepwalker in stressful times, and I remember when my parents got divorced, we went to space camp, which was like NASA themed summer camp as they separated their stuff.
Yeah.
And first night I was there, I woke up and I had a bloody nose because it was up in the mountains. It was really dry. So I wiped it off with my towel and then went back to bed, and then woke up a couple hours later only to realize that I had sleptwalked into somebody else's room and then wiped my bloody nose with their towel. And it was the middle of the night, so I ran away and escaped to my room, and then I was woken up to a scream because somebody found their clothes, their stuff all covered in blood. And I could have totally just been like, "Oh, whoa, that's crazy." And they're like, "What happened?" And then I stupidly admitted that it was me.
No, that's honest. That's good character right there.
Yes, but then they're like, "You're a freak." And I was like, "Ah, damn."
Well, I mean, that's true, though. You are a freak, so it's okay.
I am a freak. That was an accurate declaration of who I was to become, but yes.
So yeah,
shout out to...
There you go. You and Sam have that in common. You were both sleepwalkers, which he was apparently like a big sleepwalker. He would sleepwalk all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, one massive undercurrent of Sammy's boyhood culture that would profoundly penetrate his life moving forward was slavery. His parents were slave owners, and some of Sammy's earliest memories came from the jargon and chatter of slaves, which he would later describe as like listening to someone speak in code, only being able to understand half of what was said. So, like, not to be stereotypical or anything, but black people, especially in America, y'all got great slang. You invent most slang, and that has been, right, and that has been a thing for a very long time, even in this point in history, which is like
it's interesting to describe it as code. I wonder if there's actually some intention of that. If anybody has studied, any linguists who are listening have studied AAVE, I'm wondering, is any of that relevant to sort of that time period?
I'd be willing to bet you're completely right. There had to have been some aspect where they're like, we can't have all these white people understand the stuff that we're saying, because if they did, they would get mad. Right? Because they were probably there's probably a way to gripe too and be like, this person sucks, but they could say it in a way that they couldn't understand. So it was like, great, we can get away with it because we've got this specific way of talking to each other. You know what I mean? It makes me think of, you've seen the movie Airplane?
Yes. Oh, no.
It makes me think of the guys that are speaking in jive. We're like, slap babe,
jive.
slap a piece of the bottom, drop some Java.
The old white lady coming up.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But yeah, interesting.
But from the voices of slaves, he would conjure imagery and emotions that he could find nowhere else. Modern historians describe it as young Samuel Clemens discovering jazz music, but in verbal form. As a child, he had not yet quite discovered his own sense of morality when it came to slavery and the American attitude towards people of color, and like most children, leaned heavily on the influence of his parents. And this is something I can personally relate to. You and I have had this conversation before. I was raised very religious and in a time that was like, being gay is not okay. And then I get out into the world, I learn more, I meet more people, and now I'm complete 180 of being like, oh my God, this is so stupid of me to have ever thought that.
Yeah.
But the circumstances of my upbringing led me to believe something that, I thought was true at the time, but then experience makes you change. You know what I mean?
It's an important fact of history and culture and anthropology just in general that I think is sometimes overlooked today.
Totally.
It's like you are, whether you like it or not, a product of your environment. Now, you can cut through it, but like, don't think that because you were born now in an enlightened time, that if you were born way back when, that you would somehow have this all-seeing vision that would stop you from making poor ethical decisions.
Totally.
Because that's just not true. Otherwise, they would have done it too.
Yeah.
Totally.
But his moral compass would change over time, and he would later write of his mother, quote, kind-hearted and compassionate as she was, I think she was not conscious that slavery was a bald, grotesque, and unwarranted usurpation. She had never heard it assailed in any pulpit, but had heard it defended and sanctified in 1,000. As far as her experience went, the wise, the good, and the holy were unanimous in the belief that slavery was right, righteous, sacred, the particular pet of the deity, and a condition which the slave himself ought to be daily and nightly thankful for. Basically saying she grew up in a time and a place where everybody, even in her church, was saying, not only is this good, but your God is telling you this is good and right. So in her mind, he's speaking of his mother. This was great.
A deeply important lesson we could pick on and sort of pick apart today.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever find yourself, and I won't get into the nitty gritty, but if you ever find yourself on an interstate and you look at one of those posters and you're like, how could these people think that? Just think for a second that maybe the culture or group or church or whatever you're finding is in a bubble, and that like the option of thinking anything other than that is just almost non-existent.
Yeah. And I will also say, not to pick on it too much or whatever, but we see examples of it still today where people can manipulate religious text to say whatever they want it to say. It can fit their own narrative. As Dan McClellan would say, they can use these things to align with their own political identity. Or what he says, identity politics. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that sort of research article that, and this kind of puts it in both ways. Research article recently came out talking about asking Christians whether or not they believed that if Jesus was conservative or progressive. And if you were progressive, you had a 30% likelihood of thinking that he was progressive. And if you were conservative, you had a 30% likelihood of thinking that he was conservative, right? Like, that's just, you want to see yourself in God, and that happens a lot. And sometimes it's a great thing, and a lot of the times it's not.
Totally. Now, Sammy's childhood innocence saw little difference between his skin color and the skin color of slaves, and his earliest memory of a childhood friend was the daughter of a slave named Mary. When he could muster up the strength to leave his bed, he and Mary would spend their evenings in the slave quarters listening to spooky ghost stories told by Mary's father, whom everyone called Uncle Daniel. Now, it was from Uncle Daniel that young Sammy would first become enamored with the art of good storytelling and the dialect of the enslaved peoples of America. It wasn't just the stories that Uncle Daniel told, it was the way he told them. His rhythm, his timing, his volume, his slang, his long pauses before a sudden roar of emphasis. All of these factors would be tucked away and adopted later by Mark Twain, who would use Uncle Daniel in part as the inspiration for the character of Jim in his magnum opus, Huckleberry Finn. Now, in November of 1836, Sammy's father, John Marshall, became a judge for Monroe County, Missouri. Though Sammy had a pleasant relationship with his mother, his father was a different story and was known to be cold and indifferent towards his entire family. Ron Powers, the author of my primary source, described Sammy's relationship with his father perfectly by saying that Sammy was, quote, escaping notice, but noticing. In other words, little Sammy was paying attention to everything, even if the adults around him didn't know. This is something I can personally relate to. Akiva, you have even noticed this about me in the past.
Yes.
Now, John Marshall would later serve as the inspiration for all, I should say, cold-shouldered figures in Mark Twain's later writings, including Judge Thatcher in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, the father of Tom Sawyer's sweetheart, Becky Thatcher. So really, throughout all of Mark Twain's writings, if there's ever like this sort of like harsh, kind of cold, not necessarily evil, but like not warm character, that was based off of his dad almost every single time.
Interesting.
Which, yeah, pretty, I mean...
tells you how they felt about one another.
Right.
Now, I like that. Noticing, barely being noticed, but still noticing.
Escaping notice, but noticing. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like a lot of kids who live in like an abusive or sort of fucked up childhood situation kind of get to that point where they like realize that they can kind of skate behind and between the lines, and they can criticize where they're at so long as they don't end up getting caught. You know what I'm saying? I like that.
Yeah, or even just, the more that the kids pay attention, the more they can understand how to navigate through this world that is complicated to them.
Yeah.
That they don't fully understand yet, but they're like, but I notice if this happens, when they react like this, I can do this, and then the situation is going to go down. Like, we can resolve it without anger, whatever else it might be. Yeah. That was very much something that Mark Twain would do. Now, in 1838, when Sammy was 3 years old, the last of the Clemens children would be born, a boy named Henry. But in the summer of 1839, Sammy's sister Margaret came down with a serious case of yellow fever, though at the time they didn't know what it was and called it bilious fever, which means like vomiting and fever and stuff like that. And in case anybody is curious, yellow fever, the reason they really didn't know what it was is that it was sort of new to America. It came over via mosquitoes on slave ships. So it was almost like a
little bit of retribution.
Yeah, the physical tax that came to the white people in America for importing slaves was like, that you literally brought mosquitoes with yellow fever, and now that started to kill off a bunch of your kids. Yeah, it's harsh, but it's the reality.
It's sort of biblical.
Yeah. Now, one night, as Margaret lay helplessly in bed, the oldest Clemens boy, Orion, sat beside her. From the still darkness of the small house, he noticed the ghostly, silent figure of his younger brother, Sammy, glide into the room, sleepwalking. With his eyes shut, Sammy went to Margaret's bedside, fidgeted with her blanket, then glided back to his room. When Orion told his parents about this the next day, both became convinced it was an old Kentucky superstition called plucking the coverlet, which foreshadowed death.
Oh, I didn't know what that meant.
I know, I didn't really either, but it's this, again, it's a superstition where like they say if the blanket of this sick person is fidgeted with, they pluck the coverlet, right? They're like, oh, that means death is coming, right? So when they heard that Sammy slept walk and did this, they were like, uh-oh,
this is it for her.
We think this is the end. And sadly, the omen proved true, as Margaret, who was just 9 years old, died on August 17th, 1839. Sammy's mother, Jane, went hysterical. This was the second child she had lost. From this ordeal and the ominous actions of Sammy just a few nights before, Jane became convinced that Sammy possessed supernatural powers. I said that funny. Supernatural powers. Now, not long after this, after facing yet more financial troubles, John Marshall moved the family to Hannibal, Missouri, located about 40 miles from the backwater town of Florida and nested on the shores of the mighty Mississippi River. Though Hannibal was technically bigger than Florida, it was still tiny, holding roughly 1,000 residents, with its primary industries being timber and livestock processing. In order to make the move possible, John Marshall had sold off nearly 500 acres of the land he had amassed in Florida and purchased an entire city block in Hannibal, only 100 yards or so from the shores of the Mississippi. And you can actually look at it on a map. Mark Twain's childhood home is marked, and it is literally like a block from the shores of the Mississippi. It's super close.
Interesting.
Which, if anybody's a Mark Twain fan out there, you know the Mississippi River is central to most of his writing.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
there's
huge
almost like
component, you know.
Yeah.
But we'll also talk about more experiences he has on the Mississippi as we go along. It's pretty cool. Now, the family moved into a converted hotel of sorts, living on the second floor. Rather than investing in the local economy's primary industries, John Marshall decided it was best to open up a general store, which the town did not need. They already had one.
Oh, whoops.
It would prove to be yet another failure, which John Marshall just could never figure out finances. Sam's dad, Mark Twain's dad, he just was not good with it. Now, for little Sammy, who was just turning 4, Hannibal was a paradise by comparison to Florida. It was a proper town with streets and alleyways, horse-drawn carriages, saloons, and stores. There was a constant flow of new faces and characters brought to town on massive steamboats, previously powered by horses on treadmills, by the way, if you didn't know that.
What? I did not know that.
Yeah, prior to steam, the actual paddle propellers, they had horses inside on treadmills that they would have walk along, and that's what would propel the paddles.
That's wild.
But these steamboats, whose massive 3-story tall, 300-foot lengths spewed thick clouds of black smoke into the air as they were propelled through the river with their iconic red paddle wheels. Businessmen stepped off the ships wearing slick white pinstriped suits, and their wives were draped in fine silk dresses holding lacy parasols. Their rooms and restaurants contained gold-framed mirrors, velvet carpets, and glistening chandeliers. Outside the wealthy, ships brought European settlers like French merchants and British land barons, circus performers, entertainers of all kinds, prostitutes, grizzled fur trappers, riverboat gamblers, and of course, more slaves. A veritable cross-section of the new America. Sammy had never seen anything like it and soon began dreaming of adventure on the mighty Mississippi. For Sammy and his friends, the ultimate fantasy for a future career was becoming a steamboat pilot, a dream that Sammy would not soon forget. But life at home, however, wasn't quite as glamorous for Sammy. He was still sickly, thin, and had lately been prone to epileptic convulsions. His father was as cold as ever, and the stresses of his continuous failures in business bled into Sammy's subconscious, who would take out his pent-up anger in fits of rage, or by playing cruel pranks on his mother, like planting snakes or bats into her sewing basket.
Oh my God.
So she'd like go to grab her sewing needle and there'd be a snake in there.
Oh my God.
Now Jane would get her revenge on Sammy by telling him horrific tales of Indian attacks that her mother supposedly endured on the frontier, which gave Sammy nightmares. Now, these stories would, sadly, manifest into a lifelong prejudice against Native Americans that Samuel Clemens would hold on to, despite later shaking off all other racism that was preached to him as a child. This is the one thing that kind of stuck, where he'd be like, oh, these Injuns kind of a thing. So, you know, hey, I guess you can't win them all. I don't know. But because life at home was so miserable, Sammy would take every chance to run outside and play. He even started taking up dangerous hobbies like trudging out onto the not fully frozen Mississippi or diving to the bottoms of local creeks, despite not knowing how to swim.
What?
This
kid is like premature, sickly little ginger kid who's like trying to drown himself.
Pretty much. And
terrifying his mother.
He would later recall being saved from drowning almost 10 times.
It kind of reminds me of Tesla too, because Tesla could swim, but he was just always so sickly that he's like, I drowned like almost 3 times when I was a child.
I don't know what it is, man, about these smarty pantses and drowning, but but soon, Sammy would find a new way to escape the gloom of his home life. Just before Sammy would turn 5, his mother Jane would enroll him in what was known as a dame school, which was essentially just a local mother who offered to teach the community kids. About a year after this, Sammy would be moved to what was known as a select school, which was held in a church basement. It was at the select school that Sammy would be taught to read by a woman named Miss Mary Ann Newcomb, who had coincidentally been a boarder with the Clemens family back in Florida. Mark Twain would later describe Miss Mary Ann Newcomb as, quote, a very thin, tall Yankee person who came west when she was 30, taught school 9 years in our town, and then married. She had ringlets and a long, sharp nose and thin, colorless lips, and you could not tell her breast from her backside if she had her head up a stovepipe hole.
Dude, these sayings, bro. When did
No, and this is
funny.
Quintessential Mark Twain. This isn't just how people wrote. This is how Mark Twain wrote.
Does that mean she had big boob and big butts, or the other way around?
No.
I don't know.
She was basically so thin, right? Because that's the whole thing.
You couldn't tell her front from her back?
If she was shoved up a chimney, you couldn't tell her chest from her butt. Basically, is what he's saying.
You got to do some mental gymnastics to make that
flat on both sides.
Turn of phrase work. But
I don't think so. I think it's great.
Well, because I'm thinking also, like, if you got a big boobs and big butt, then you can't tell. I don't know. No.
I mean, you could be right. But when I hear a very thin, tall Yankee person, I don't think of a buxom gal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. He already said thin. Yeah, okay. I get it. I'm following. I'm just an idiot.
Now, a key to Sammy's success in learning to read was the introduction of a system of education called McGuffey's Eclectic Readers, which de-emphasized the monotonous memorization of letters and syllables and instead focused on active learning and a more conversational method of instruction. The importance of McGuffey's Eclectic Readers on American literacy cannot be overstated. It shifted literacy from something only the wealthy could obtain to something every child could learn. By the beginning of the Civil War in 1861, the United States would produce the first ever mass-educated, mass-literate generation of the modern world, and McGuffey's Eclectic Readers was arguably the largest contributing factor.
Interesting.
And this I thought was amazing. Because of this, the Civil War would mark the first time in human history that mass amounts of soldiers could eloquently and almost poetically journal their firsthand experiences of war and correspond with their loved ones.
Huh.
So if you ever think about it, right? If you ever watch like a
the
Civil War documentary,
letter,
there's so much writing from the people on the ground floor going like, my dearest beloved, today my troops walked across the battlefield and saw the likes of destruction and chaos I cannot even fathom. It's these amazing, detailed, rich pieces of writing, and we have thousands of these letters. But if you go back even 50, 60 years, in the American Revolution, you get
non-existent,
nothing. There's nothing there because nobody could read or write. only the wealthy could afford to do it.
It's crazy how exponential human like growth is sometimes. Like you have something start off. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about those with cars, where it's like, 1910, there's like 1 or 2 cars in New York City. And then by 1940, there are no horses and only cars. Like, it's crazy how like you have a handful of, people who can write about the American Revolution, and then by the time we get to the Civil War, everybody is writing home to their wives about the horrors or atrocities or the things that they've seen while they're, marching down to the American South. That's crazy.
Isn't that amazing? And again, This is all through this one guy. I can't remember what his first name is, but his last name is McGuffey. And he basically figured this out as he's somebody that loved to read and went, the approach to reading is wrong. The way that I learned to read was like this. So he created a new system, and it was mass distributed across the United States to different educators. So they were able to finally get kids to start to read who never previously would have had even the opportunity or ability. And it was all through this new system that he created. It's amazing, too, for all the listeners out there that don't know, my wife is a teacher, has been a teacher for 14-something years. I asked her about it. She said she didn't know what this was. She had never heard of it, which I found, I don't want to say sad, but like kind of sad, right? That was like, man.
Yeah, like an institutional sort of pillar of education globally,
right,
is just sort of forgotten.
Right. I mean, again, think about that for a second. In about 10 or 15 years, all of America went from 90% of us cannot read to 90% of us can. Because of this one system. That is unbelievable. And then if you think about that effect on industry moving forward, now newspapers actually had reason to exist in mass because everybody could now read. Like, it's a
true.
Crazy thing to think about. There was actual demand for newspapers, not just some people would grab it and read it. Everybody wanted to grab it and read it.
Because I was thinking about that with Dumas, where it's like there were pamphlets, there were newsprints, but there wasn't necessarily a newspaper about what it is that Napoleon's doing on the battlefront. At least not yet.
And that's why for so long throughout America, throughout the West, there would be people that would come to town and just read newspapers to the crowd because they couldn't do it themselves, literally.
Yeah.
They were like, we need somebody to actually decipher this language. I mean, even you think about the implications you start to get into, where prior to this, you would go to church because you couldn't read the Bible. The pastor would do that for you. Now that this was in place, people could have their own Bible and read it for themselves. Think about that as an implication on society.
Which also totally explains like the sort of religious, the Christian explosion in America of like, why there are so many dozens of subsects of Christianity in the United States, unlike other religions. Like I was just talking about this with Caleb, where he was asking me like, oh, what do Jewish people believe about X, Y, or Z? I was like, well, there's like 10 billion different, and for Jews, literacy, most Jews have been literate throughout all of history because of the way that we teach the Torah, right? But that's interesting to talk about literacy for Americans because, that totally makes sense why we have Episcopals, and we have Lutherans, and we have Baptists, Southern Baptists, and not Southern Baptists, and Mormons, and all of these different sects, because now they're able to interpret their own religious doctrine in different ways and then divide themselves accordingly.
Correct.
I wonder if there's a connection there. Yeah.
There 100% is, and we're actually going to talk about that in a future episode.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So again, though, for everybody out there that is not aware of this thing is called McGuffey's Eclectic Readers. Again, I cannot overstate how unbelievably important it is to American literacy and really just America in general. And it is, to me, a bit of a travesty that it has been so completely forgotten by most people because it was such a paradigm shift for the entire country.
Yeah, it's like the Rosetta Stone of America in some ways.
Kinda. Yeah, that's kind of a cool poetic way to put it. But anyway, moving on. Sammy Clemens would soon become completely obsessed with reading. The English language, grammar, and words in general, especially with how he could manipulate words and use them. He would later famously say, quote, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." So cool.
And this also, gosh, everything that you're bringing up with him is like it just branches off into new waves of conversation. Because I was just talking about this with ChatGPT with education for students, where it's like, people are like, well, ChatGPT gets a lot of things mostly right when you use it, and it's like the difference between mostly right and right is infinite.
Is
right?
the lightning
like,
bug
if you're
in the
mostly
lightning.
Exactly. Like, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Mark Twain recognized this very early on, and throughout the rest of his writing career, he chose his words very carefully. We have a lot of his manuscripts, and you can see the editing that went down onto it. It was all, this was before typewriters, so everything was handwritten, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's very cool. Now, another cornerstone of McGuffey's eclectic readers, and therefore Sammy's literary education, was in reading the Bible. Now, we don't know for certain how many times Samuel Clemens read the entirety of the Bible in his lifetime, but it was at least dozens of times. He loved the framework of the parables within the Bible, but really didn't seem to care for the doctrine within. As an adult, he would describe the Bible as, quote, a vessel of blood-drenched history, and some good morals, and a wealth of obscenity, and upwards of 1,000 lies.
Yeah, that's right up your alley.
In regards to Christianity, he would also say, quote, if Christ were here now, there is one thing he would not be, a Christian.
Yeah.
But the hardships of Sammy's childhood were far from over. In May of 1842, another Clemens child would tragically pass away. This time, it was the 9-year-old Benjamin, who seemingly succumbed to the exact same illness, yellow fever, as his sister Margaret. Once again, Jane Clemens was beside herself with grief, and for reasons unknown, summoned each of her remaining children one by one into the room where Benjamin's body lay, having each of them touch his cheek. So I know. So a 6.5-year-old Sammy would be the last child called into the room to say goodbye. Influenced heavily by his mother, Sammy was already under the belief that he possessed some kind of supernatural power. So for reasons that perhaps only a child psychologist can explain, Sammy walked out of the room with a heavy sense of guilt, and for the remainder of his life would blame himself for the death of his brother, Benjamin. Oh. I know. Now, riddled with
heavy.
Very, very, very heavy. Now, riddled with intense grief, the death of Jane's third child spurred her on to think about the eternal salvation of she and her children. Shortly after the loss, she started attending Mass every Sunday at the local Presbyterian church with her remaining 4 children. Though many churches across the United States had adopted the tenets of non-denominational Christianity with a joyous emphasis on a loving God and achieved salvation through personal acceptance of said love, the Presbyterians did not abide by any such nonsense. They were still the traditional fire and brimstone, everything you do is an affront to the Almighty and you must constantly feel terrible for being such a sinner style of Christianity.
Ah, yes.
Now, like many people have experienced through time, this proved to be a ever-remaining scar in the mind of Samuel Clemens. He didn't receive messages from the preacher that would reassuringly tell him everything would be okay. On the contrary, he would be furiously scorned every week as the preacher gave detailed descriptions of just how bad hell would be and how difficult it was to avoid God's wrath. Little Sammy already blamed himself for the death of his brother, and given that murder was just about the worst thing you could do in the eyes of this terrifying God, Sammy assumed he would be condemned to hell no matter what he did.
Oh my God. That is
rough, right?
Dude. How old is he at this point? What, 8 or 9?
6.5, 7.
Oh no.
Yeah. 7.
This is bad. This is bad for a poor kid.
Yeah. Now, it was also in church that Sammy got to hear firsthand the preacher's stance on slavery. Up to that point, Sammy had a fairly innocent view on the whole matter. It was just how the world was, but he personally didn't see slaves as lesser than. But in church, the preacher was able to use the Bible to preach a pro-slavery message, and that it was indeed in accordance with God's will. Disclaimer, I am not a theologian, and I know this topic is still hotly debated to this day, so please don't send me angry letters. But historically, This is what happened throughout churches in the South prior to and still after the Civil War. Just a fact.
Yeah.
Now later, Mark Twain often claimed to be an apostate, but the foundational elements and stories within the Bible would massively influence his writing throughout his life. But outside the sadness of family death and the misery of Presbyterian doomsday sermons, Sammy Clemens lived an oftentimes idyllic childhood in the little town of Hannibal. He established a tight-knit circle of pals, and under the insistence and guidance of Sammy, the group would often scamper into the woods to reenact scenes from his favorite books. Some of his favorites included Ivanhoe, Rob Roy, and The Lady of the Lake by Sir Walter Scott, The Pilot, A Tale of the Sea, and The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper, along with every Robin Hood story he could get his hands on.
I did not know that Last of the Mohicans predated Mark Twain.
Yeah, old book. Huh. Yeah, and I think at that point it was probably only 10 or 15 years old, something like that.
Okay.
So it was relatively new, but yeah, fairly old. Now, his very best friend, who would remain so until Mark Twain's death, was a boy named Will Bowen, who would later serve as the inspiration for Tom Sawyer's best friend, Joe Harper. Will lived just down the street from Sammy, and the two were nearly inseparable. When they weren't reenacting a scene from Robin Hood, they were apparently known as quite the pair of mischievous troublemakers. On one occasion, the two climbed to the top of a hill near town where a massive boulder was perched.
Oh, no.
The two waited for a group of picnickers to begin walking by at the foot of the hill, then pressed their shoulders hard into the boulder before it gave way and began tumbling down the hill towards town. The boulder was so massive that it tore up trees, bushes, and destroyed a small wood mill in its path.
Oh my God.
The picnickers saw it coming and got out of the way, but a man slowly going down the street on a mule-drawn cart did not.
Oh no.
By the time the driver did see the boulder coming, all he could do was stop, open his mouth in disbelief, and stare. But thankfully, at the last minute, the boulder hit another rock on the ground and was launched into the air over the head of the man and his mule before smashing into a cooper's workshop.
Oh my God. I just imagine in Avatar, my cabbages.
It is literally like a cartoon. That was all I could think of. It was like a Looney Tunes cartoon. Is the boulder rolling down, and then at the last second, like Wile E. Coyote trying to get the Roadrunner, it hits another rock and goes whoo over the Roadrunner. Like, that's exactly what I thought of.
That's so funny.
Now, seeing that nobody got hurt, the two boys thought it was awesome, laughed it off, and hightailed it before anyone could discover they were the culprits. So nobody ever figured out it was them. They just thought it was an accident.
I used to do stuff like that all the time when I was a kid, man. This is just like all reminding me of my childhood and like Ellicott and hanging out and going fishing and throwing rocks in the pond and having the guys yell at us because they're trying to fish there and we're scaring off their bait and everything.
Oh, and that is
great.
One of the reasons that things like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn became so popular, is because he was able to write in this way that made almost everybody go like, even if that wasn't the case for me, that feels like my childhood too. He just had that way, and this was Hannibal for him. It was this beautifully idyllic kind of thing in many ways. We're going to see a few kind of darker sides of it too, but in so many ways, it was like this, you know, the boyhood of dreams. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is like, you know, no shoes, running into the woods, playing Robin Hood with sticks, like the whole thing. It kind of in many ways came from Mark Twain's writing. Anyway. Now, his childhood continued on in whimsical fashion, especially after his family moved into their new house just 1 block away, 206 Hill Street, which would forever be considered his boyhood home and the primary inspiration for Tom Sawyer's boyhood home, the one with a whitewashed fence. I'm not sure if you ever had to read Tom Sawyer, but at the very beginning of the book, she's like, Tom, you gotta whitewash the fence. That's 206 Hill Street. So for any fans out there that know that. Now, Sammy shared a room on the 2nd floor of the house with his brother Henry, which included a window that faced the street. Mark Twain would later fondly recall awakening at night to the faint shouts of his gang of pals gathered outside his window, beckoning him to join them. Sammy would then slip out of the window, tiptoe across the awning, hop onto a nearby woodshed, then down to the street to join his friends. So it was like this perfect situation of escaping his room and then being able to get back into it. Again, idyllic childhood stuff. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
I just finished watching... It's so weird to make a connection like this, but I just finished watching some Studio Ghibli movies, and I was like, I can... The way that Miyazaki and Mark Twain find a way to like encapsulate like the innocence of youth, I feel like is very similar.
Yeah. And specifically with Mark Twain too, it's not just the innocence of youth, it is the transition from the innocence of youth to the reality of manhood, specifically for characters like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, that's like
through harsh realities.
Oh, totally. Yeah. That kind of, it reminds me a lot of Howl's Moving Castle is about that.
Spirited Away, you could say.
Spirited Away, definitely about that. Totoro, certainly. Like, that's really interesting that I'm making a connection there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I never thought about that either.
Yeah.
Now, at night, the ringleader of the gang shifted to a boy named Tom Blankenship, the raggedy, rough-and-tumble son of a local drunk whose sisters were regularly accused of being prostitutes. Tom was about 4 years older than Sammy and was known to be a bit of a vagrant around town, often sleeping outdoors, having no respect for adults, school, or religion whatsoever, possessing a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush, and was a veritable expert on all things witchy and superstitious. Under Tom's leadership, Sammy and his friends explored the nightlife of Hannibal, peeking in on saloons filled with gamblers, prostitutes, and drunks, or sneaking off to the docks to hear the sailors curse up a storm and tell tales from the river. Mark Twain would later immortalize his pal Tom Blankenship as the infamous vagabond known the world over as Huckleberry Finn.
I love that.
It was funny because when he wrote Huckleberry Finn, his sister read it, and as soon as she read it, she went, "That's Tom Blankenship." Like, it was so obvious to everybody that knew him that it was like, there's no other person this could be. This is Tom Blankenship. So just kind of a cool little homage. But that's how much he loved this guy. It was like his bud, who was just this total like free spirit kind of a thing. Really cool. But not all of Sammy's childhood was as idyllic as these stories. Hannibal, Missouri wasn't immune to the cruelties and relative lawlessness of the times. When Sammy was about 11 years old, he witnessed his first murder, not 1 block from his house. A local shopkeeper had grown tired of a local drunk's behavior and in broad daylight shot the drunk twice, and Sammy witnessed his slow death, which took over an hour. This guy bled out.
Oh my God.
The town was shocked and abuzz for weeks about the first premeditated murder in its history. But Sammy also witnessed the strange juxtaposition of how murder was treated in the town based on the color of a person's skin. Only a few months after the shooting, Sammy witnessed a slave owner beat a slave to death with his bare hands in full display of the public at large. Just like the murdered drunk, the poor slave took over an hour to perish, but the townsfolk hardly batted an eye. Nobody cared.
That's so weird. That's so weird, especially like growing up as a child with like just very minimal context because you're a kid, and seeing this like disparity and being like, why are the grown-ups not freaking out right now like they did last week? Like, that is so chilling.
I know. He was just like, how is it you don't... For weeks, you guys were talking about this murder. This guy shot this other guy. Oh my gosh. And then this guy got beat to death. And we all just kind of went, eh.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah. Sammy just couldn't seem to understand how a white man's death could be seen as an act of murder, while a black man's was seen as nothing more than destruction of personal property akin to a child destroying a toy out of frustration. There was even a point when Sammy and his pals rafted across the Mississippi River to a small island to forage for blackberries. There, they encountered the dead body of a runaway slave named Nerium Todd. It later came to light that for weeks, despite having a bounty on his head, Nerium was aided by Tom Blankenship's older brother, Bence, who brought him food and supplies.
Oh.
But after a group of lumberjacks discovered Nerium on the island, they murdered him, mutilated his body, and left it to rot. Perhaps in an idealized version of what might have been, Mark Twain would later write Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, in which the protagonist Huck finds a runaway slave named Jim hiding out on an island, and the two escape together, rafting down the Mississippi and forming an unbreakable friendship. That's making me misty. Woo.
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote this and have read it several times, but for whatever reason, that hit me harder right now.
Man, to see that story came from what could have been, to see that as a kid,
right? To
see that your one of your best buds, his older brother, was trying to nurture
and help
a man. Ooh, that's making me really fucking emotional.
I know, same. That's why I was like,
I'm trying to nurture a man, and then like grown adults step in and
kill him for no reason, really.
They didn't even claim the bounty. Know him.
They didn't even claim the bounty. That was one of the sickest parts of it, was that they found him and were like, oh, you're the guy who is being hunted down, killed him, left him to rot, didn't even care. They were just like, well, we know the law's on our side, and that was that. And so, yeah.
I mean, it's brutal. It's more than medieval, you know? It is. I mean, cavemen still kill because they hunt, you know? Like, I that's crazy to think about. And it's so... so profound to think that Huckleberry Finn came from that. And yeah,
much later on in the series, we're going to talk pretty in depth about Huckleberry Finn and the implications of it and what was being said and some of the language that he specifically used and wrote. It's you can feel it, that it's this very personal thing for him. He becomes very passionate about it over time, of like the injustice suffered by black folks in America, specifically enslaved ones. He just, as he got older and older and older, the more he was completely perplexed by it, and an adamant, opponent of it. And anyway, we'll get there over time. But yeah, I just thought it was an amazing thing that as a kid he saw this and learned, oh man, Tom Blankenship's brother, Tom's one of my best buddies. His brother was trying to help this guy, and there's this thing of, well, when he goes to write Huckleberry Finn, it's based off of Tom Blankenship, so it's a pretty easy line to draw that it was like, Huck meets Jim on this island, and it's almost like Quentin Tarantino correcting history through his movies, right?
Yeah.
It almost feels like that's what Mark Twain was doing with Huckleberry Finn with this story, that it was like, what should have happened is they should have gotten on a raft together and gotten the hell out of there, and they should have become friends, and they should have all of that.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, I get goosebumps. It's pretty cool.
Wow.
Now, anyway, throughout all of Sammy's childhood, his father John Marshall just could not seem to get his act together when it came to finances, and he was in debt up to his eyes. After selling everything he possibly could, including the family's house slave named Jenny, whom Sammy loved and saw as something of a second mother, the family home on Hill Street was eventually sold too, and for about a year, the family's place of residence is unknown. But through it all, Sammy's mother Jane saw to it that Sammy remained in school. By the end of 1846, the Clemens family hit rock bottom. John Marshall was sued over debts that he still owed. The family sold everything they had, and they were kindly given lodgings out of charity from a local pharmacist. The family did what they could to scrape by. Jane washed clothes and cooked meals for the locals. Pamelia gave piano lessons. Orion worked as a typesetter for a local newspaper. And John Marshall provided legal services anywhere he could in the surrounding area. But it was in March of 1847 that things would take an ultimate turn for the worse. After providing some legal services in a town called Palmyra, some 13 miles outside Hannibal, John Marshall was making his way back home and was caught in a storm. He contracted pneumonia and lay in bed for weeks, struggling to breathe. On March 24th, 1847, the patriarch of the Clemens family, John Marshall, succumbed to his sickness and died at the age of 49. At the funeral, Sammy's mother, Jane, took the young boy to look upon his father's casket. Jane wanted to take the moment to impress upon Sammy the importance of continuing his education. But before Jane could say anything, little Sammy threw his arms around her waist and said, quote, "Oh, mother, I will do anything you ask of me except go to school. I can't do that." It was as if Sammy had read her thoughts, impressing further into her mind that he possessed supernatural gifts. She sighed, took him out of the room, and the two had a long talk. Rather than continuing on with school, the two agreed that Sammy could decide on a trade and become an apprentice. Sammy landed on becoming a printer's apprentice or typesetter and learned the same trade as his older brother Orion. So with his father dead and the family in dire straits, it was now up to Orion and Sammy to take care of the family. At the tender age of 12 years old, Sammy would cast off from the dock of his childhood, adopt the more adult name of Sam, and enter the workforce as an apprentice typesetter.
Wow.
Young Sam Clemens was about to become a primary breadwinner for his family, taking on the burdens of adulthood and entering the world of publication, which would eventually lead him down the path of becoming the most famous author of his time, the incomparable Mark Twain. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 2 of Mark Twain.
Dude, I wasn't expecting to get misty-eyed just within the first episode.
It's good stuff. I told you. And this is why I was like, it's going to be a long series because there's so much good stuff. And it's the little moments, right? Where I debated of like, can I take out the story of the boulder? I could, but it says so much about his character and who he becomes as he grows up, like the mischief he would get into and the fun he would have with his friends. And like all of this stuff is this perfect, it sets this stage for who this guy becomes over time. And to me, it's the best stuff. It's just a ton of fun, you know, and also illuminating. Like I said, seeing this point in history through the eyes of this little kid, right? And trying to figure out morality and trying to figure out how the world sees slavery and superiority and religion and reading and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I just think it's awesome and fascinating.
It's a lot to be born. I truly do believe that most kids are born innocent. Like maybe they're a little selfish, but they are born, I don't know, untapped from the evils of the world. And then to have this both innocent childhood where you're exploring and having that like that Studio Ghibli, you know, sort of setting in some rural pastoral area or something like that. And then just to be immediately presented with one of the hardest, most bitter truths of humanity, which is the transatlantic slave trade.
Yep.
Is such a crazy juxtaposition that I mean, how could it not make Mark Twain? You know, like that's yeah. And we're just getting cooking, man. There's so much good stuff coming up, in my opinion, and you know, I keep saying it, but it is going to be a long series. But I think you'll see why it's going to be really important, and I'm hoping maybe even more than any series that at least I've ever done, everybody listening will be able to get something very personal out of it. Not just, this is interesting, this thing happened, and what a crazy series of events. But, you know, you can kind of already see these little relatable pieces of who this person was and how they thought and how they saw the world and what their experiences were. You know, I already kind of said it earlier, but it was like, you know, having that sort of religious upbringing and being told this is what's right and this is what's wrong, and then growing and discovering exposure.
Change. Yeah. That's such a huge part of his story. Miniature spoiler alert. We're way later on in Mark Twain's life, way later, when he's in his like 50s. We're going to get to this point where he meets a former slave woman, and she tells him this story that completely knocks him off his feet. And it is this just like, it almost felt like by that point in his life, he most of his sort of racism was cast away. But when he meets this woman and hears her story, it is like, now we're down to 0%. Like,
it's a confirmation.
Oh my gosh. It's an amazing story. But again, I'll save that for way later.
We've talked about this so many times too, but it's just incredible how the most minute amount of exposure can completely change someone's perspective on life. If you are devoutly religious and you meet just one person from another religion, or like myself, I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and then my mom married somebody who wasn't, and that was a complete paradigm shift. And then I went to an art school with tons of queer kids, and that was a complete paradigm shift. And then my wife is now in roller derby, which is a particularly queer space here in Denver.
Yeah.
And that was, obviously not the same extent, but still a change in perspective. And it's just like that exposure. I'm pretty sure Mark Twain said something like travel is the antidote for ignorance or something like that. I can't remember.
I have to look that one up.
Yeah. And I feel like, he's an example of that. So I'm really stoked to see where this goes.
Yeah. And another miniature spoiler, dude becomes an absolute monster of world travel. Like, he goes everywhere and sees everything. And I think it becomes a huge part of the influence of his mind of, if I leave here and I go there, people treat people differently. And it's that click in the brain of like, wait a second, people live in different ways depending on where you are in the globe. That's crazy. And then again, his perspective starts to shift. And where this goes to is that it's like, you had said something, I think in office hours, about you thought Mark Twain was stuffy. And I'm telling you, man, I'm trying to include as many quotes as I can to give you the sense of how non-stuffy the guy is. And really how like the signature of Mark Twain is anti-stuffy. It's like the dude is a maverick writer. In the best way, and really funny. I'm saving some stuff as we go along here, but like there are some times I literally have burst out laughing reading through a lot of this stuff because it's so like, damn, this guy's wit is so sharp. I mean, razor sharp. And it's not just sharp wit, it's like the observations about things and how he frames them are just like, dude's shooting from the hip, man. It's like, it's good stuff.
I'm pumped. I'm going to start listening to which for myself and for the other listeners. Are there any books that you would recommend we listen to or read while we go through the series? Like which ones do you think are your top picks?
I mean, I would say it depends on what you're looking for. I would say fairly unquestionably, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is the magnum opus of Mark Twain. It is the one historians look back to, literary experts, Twainian experts, they all look back and go, this is the greatest work he has ever done. If you're looking for something else, though, and I would recommend Huckleberry Finn. It is amazing. Not only is it great language, but the story itself, what it's trying to say. And I will also say to everybody, I know that it's sort of like a joke that the character Jim, his name's not Jim in the book. It is N-word Jim. And for anybody that goes, well, he was a racist, you don't understand. It was, he uses that very pointedly as he's calling it out. It's not an indictment. It is it's a way of exposing the sort of hillbilly mentality of the time, where he's going, this is what it was and what we want to move away from.
Yeah.
So it is weirdly important because he does use the language on purpose to expose, not to embrace. So I want to make that a very clear distinction as you approach Huckleberry Finn. But again, if you're looking for something different, I would recommend either his first true novel, which is called The Innocents Abroad. The Innocents Abroad, we're going to talk all about it in episode, I think, 4, but it's his experiences when he goes on this chartered trip throughout Europe and the Holy Land with this group of rich Christians.
Oh, I'm going to love that. I'm going to love that.
It's fun and funny, and it was a smash hit.
Yeah.
If you want something more off the beaten path for Mark Twain, we're going to talk about this later on as well, I would recommend his book, The Gilded Age, which if you didn't know anybody, he coined the term, the Gilded Age. Mark Twain invented that label to describe that time in history, the Gilded Age, and he wrote a book called The Gilded Age, which is, it's fictional.
Yeah.
But it is very cool and very interesting. So I would say those would be my main recommendations. And of course, Tom Sawyer, but I feel like most people have read a good bit of Tom Sawyer as kids in school. It's usually mandatory reading. somewhere.
Yeah. We actually skipped Tom Sawyer in my school. I think we did Great Gatsby instead, but yeah, I think I'm going to start with Huckleberry Finn and then probably do Innocents Abroad, because that sounds very fun for me. I feel like I'm going to like that one.
Yeah. And I will say that Huckleberry Finn is one of those books, and this is Twain does this on purpose, where if you ever actually read, not listen to, if you ever actually read Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, you're going to notice that he writes in dialect. So it'll be like, show Hucky that's gay. And it reads really weird, where your brain goes, what? And you actually have to slow down your pace. Mark Twain does that on purpose. Yeah. Because he wants you to digest the language more. Mm-hmm. So my recommendation would be, if you can read it, go for it. But I do also understand that it can be frustrating because it can slow you down. Yeah. So if you wanted to listen to the audiobook, I think you can get a lot from it as well. And you can get through it probably even a little bit faster if you're just like washing dishes or whatever. So those would be my recommendations for starting points for Mark Twain. And amazingly, his catalog of actual novels is really pretty short. Like you get Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. There's The Prince and the Pauper, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, The Gilded Age. I think he wrote maybe one or two other spin-offs of Tom Sawyer, like one's called like Detective Tom Sawyer or something like that. Or one is called Tom Sawyer Abroad. And that's more, I might be missing one novel, but like those are the novels that he wrote. Everything else was like short stories, travel books, essays, everything in between. Mm-hmm. So despite him having massive tomes of writing, his actual novel list is relatively short. So just food for thought. But I don't think you can really go too wrong. You might be slightly disappointed in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and you might be a little disappointed in The Prince and the Pauper, but they're all worth your time. So, yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Dude, you knocked it out of the park. Excellent episode, man. That was fantastic. I'm really excited to hear the next one.
Me too. I genuinely am like, I just want to go into the next episode now and record it because I'm having fun. But yeah, I know we'll pace this out and everything. But yeah, hope everybody else is enjoying this as well. Buckle up for a long series. I really do hope you enjoy it. I'm trying my absolute hardest to trim out the fat, but also include important parts, good quotes, all that good stuff to paint a really rich story here. So I hope everybody enjoys it as we go through the series here.
Nice, man.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up here. Again, thanks everybody for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or corrections for us, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. If you feel like supporting the show, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. We're on social media, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, but that's lesser for us. I feel like, we always say we need to get back into it, and we will. It's just a pain in my butt, and I don't like it. I'm being honest with you. I don't like social media, but I know it's like the key for everything. So anyhow, if you can give us a follow there or whatever, we try to post all of our episodes, at least on YouTube, to where you can get to them there. Any metal updates from you, my friend?
Well, now that we got the van, we are good on that front. I have a couple of classes, not only for this month, but also for October, that have a couple of available spots. We're almost booked out. By the time that this airs, there will be a Sanmai class at the end of this month, which is really fun. It's actually one of the only classes where you get to operate a power hammer.
Sweet.
We just got a new trip hammer at Hardy and Fuller. So if you want to take a knife making class, if you want to learn knife making, check out Hardy and Fuller, sign up for one of the knife making classes. If you're going to do a chef knife or a Sanmai class, I highly recommend taking one of the beginner classes first. It's just going to guarantee that you have a better product in the end. If you want to buy one of your own knives, please go to metalworkbymiola.com. You can use the code Biographers at checkout for 10% off. Not sure if we're doing a bit of a flash sale, so we'll see when this ends up airing. There's also another code, Japan, for 15% off. Mainly just because I'm going to have that trip. I'm going to go to Japan. I'm trying to save up a little bit of money so I can take some tours of some excellent sword museums and maybe even take a couple of knife making classes while I was there. really informative the first time. But either way, Biographers gets you 10% off. And if you listen to this recently, like before October, you can use code Japan for 15% off any order. That also includes commissions if you're looking for something custom. The holidays are coming. Don't let it fall behind.
Nice.
I think that's it.
Cool. So yeah, everybody, once again, go to Metalwork by Miola. Check out his knives that he's been working on. They're super cool. You'll see that immediately and go, ooh, I want one of those in my hands. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. Again, thanks everybody so much for listening. We'll see you next time. And do remember, like always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.